Hello, Dr. David Cook for week 3. My expository sermon is going to be the title Spiritually Mature People versus Babes in Christ. The subject is how to tell the difference between mature and immature believers, and we see that in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. So, my first point is as teachers, we cannot take the same approach with babes in Christ and spiritual people. And we see that in verse 1, where Paul talks about how he's addressing people that are still carnal. So with that said, with my point A, it says, with babes, they must be fed with milk. And we see that in verse 2, where he mentions, I fed you with milk and not with solid food. So with babes in Christ, we have to approach them with milk, very little, not very deep theology, but something that they're going to understand, just like Jesus did. B, babes cannot receive solid food. We see that in verse 2 because it says, for until now you were not able to receive it, and even now you're still not able to. So we have to keep giving them milk before they can move forward with the solid food that Paul is talking about. C, carnal/flesh prevents them from receiving the solid food. And we see that in verse 3 because he said, for you are still carnal, for where there are envy, strife, and divisions. So Paul is showing them you're still carnal because you are still doing things of the flesh. So that's why he cannot give them solid food, because they still need to learn the basic foundational structures of the scriptures and the teachings of Jesus. Point number 2, it says, if you are still carnal, it will show. And we see that in verse 3, what I just said, the envy, the strife, the division that was being caused among the people that Paul was that he was addressing in that church, that they were still showing signs of the flesh. So that was my point A, envy, strife, division, verse 3. Division, point B, division shows when you say, I am of Paul and I am of Apollos. So we see that in verse 4, they were saying, no, I follow what Paul says. No, I follow what Apollos says. And Paul is saying, no, we're all following the teachings of Jesus Christ. We're not picking and choosing in what we're going to learn or who we're going to learn from or what we're going to learn. So that's why he's saying, hey, that's part of the flesh. C, it says, carnality division will not let us see that our leaders are all under Christ. And we see that in verse 5 when Paul says, who is Apollo and who's Paul, who is Apollo, ministers through whom believed, as the Lord gave to each one. So we see that each one comes from Christ. And then he goes, in my point number 3, he shows that watering, working, and God increases. So we see that from verse 6 through 8. Paul is showing that one planet, it's saying Paul planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither who is plant or is anything, nor he who waters, but God who gives the increase. Now he who plants and he who waters are one, and each one will receive his own reward according to his labor. So we see here that Paul, with my point A under number 3, we must recognize that our leaders are going to pour into us, verse 6. So each leader is pouring into us, but the foundational is Christ. So we shouldn't say, well, I'm learning from this one, I'm learning from that one, because that's what Paul is saying. It's creating division. B, God ultimately will give us the increase, so we become spiritually mature and no longer babes. We see that in verse 7. The Lord is the one that will give the increase. And C, our leaders are one and working as the same goal to see the babes grow spiritually. Verse 8. So they're all together working with the same cause, that they want to see the babes to grow spiritually mature, not to remain in the flesh or carnal.